Hello there, and welcome along to the first episode of the Gardener Ben podcast. And as described in the introduction, I'm actually here today with my husband Mark, with a view for you to get to know me a little bit better. He's actually going to ask me a series of questions. So, Mark, what's your first question?
First, a disclaimer, because when I talk, I'm not as perfectly presented as you, so I just want to put that out there right now because I know what you're like with perfection. Okay, so you'll probably delete this one and start again because I've said that. Right, first question. Can you share your journey into gardening? What sparked your initial interest and how did it evolve into the passion, obsession that you have today?
The journey's been very, very long. It started at a very, very early age. I don't really have a clear memory of when, it's just always has been. I do remember turning up at my nan and granddad's house with my parents and my brother and my sister to find my dad's mum often tending roses out on her drive, always wearing a pair of suede gardening gloves and often with a trug and a pair of secateurs in her hand. Their drive was lined with standard roses and she would always cut blooms for the house. So that's probably my earliest ever real memory of gardening, and I think it really started then. I also had a next door neighbour when I was very, very young, from a very young age, and I used to hop over the 3-foot dividing fence between our gardens, and I used to go and have bonfires with him and milky cups of tea, and he showed me how to prune lots of bits and pieces and fruit trees and grow vegetables, and we used to sort of spend lots of time in his greenhouse and sharpening and oiling his lawnmower, that kind of thing. So that's probably my earliest impressions of gardening. But after that I started a gardening round. I used to mow lawns from about age 11 on a Saturday and Sunday morning. From then, as soon as I was old enough, I got a job at a local nursery where I shoveled compost and broke up paving slabs for crazy paving and repotted plants. That was from about the age of 14. So I've always been in and around the craft, but yeah, it's been a long, long journey.
I love the idea of you in your little welly boots hopping over the garden fence. I love this one. Describe your perfect Sunday.
My perfect Sunday or your perfect Sunday?
Same thing, surely.
They're quite different. My perfect Sunday would be a slow morning. I'm not often up out of bed anymore very early. I spend about 20 minutes, half an hour on my phone catching up with my media profiles. And then a nice leisurely breakfast, probably with an episode of Drag Race, something like that.
Yay.
Something like a salmon and cream cheese bagel with a cup of tea for breakfast. And then out into the garden. You're obviously normally in the house. You don't like coming out in the garden. So I like to be left alone for just maybe 3 or 4 hours. Nothing too hectic, nothing too involved. Maybe some deadheading, some weeding, some seed sowing. And then mow the lawn at the end of the weekend. Maybe on the end of a Sunday, I like to mow the lawn so everything's really, really smart and tidy. Maybe film some content, and then an early finish and early tea, which you'll normally you've prepared because I'm out in the garden, and a nice restful evening. That's probably the perfect Sunday, I think.
I'd like to caveat that I'm normally inside to enable you to be outside.
Well, I did say your idea of the perfect Sunday was different to mine.
Right, next question is, every season brings something unique to the garden. Which season do you find most inspiring for your gardening activities, and what specific aspects do you love about that time of year?
I can't choose a season, you know me. I'm not one of these people that can ever choose anything. I love all of the seasons equally, and I think these days with our modern climate, they've probably broken down into 4 equal parts. So instead of having 4 seasons, we've probably now got more like 16 in different windows. I love spring. Absolutely adore spring, and I think it's probably the one that everybody will say, because after the garden goes to sleep, and the garden here does really go to sleep for around 6, 7, maybe 8 weeks from the end of November through to the end of January. It's the time that I get to probably not spend so much time actually labouring on the garden. I get to actually advance the garden a little bit more, and then you have that riot of colour. And I think spring, I will never understand why people try and colour coordinate spring. I personally think spring should be absolutely every single colour under the sun, a whole smorgasbord of things. We plant huge amounts of varying bulbs, and I think it's the bulbs coming up have got so much potential and so much joy that they bring. So as we move into spring, probably spring is my favourite, but high summer, is particularly lovely, and I particularly love this time of year as well, as we move into late August, into September and into October, when you've had the zenith of everything has been at its peak, and I absolutely love watching the colour seep out of everything as it slowly ages, as the colour drains from the plants in the garden. I know a lot of people will find that really disturbing, and it's quite sad for a lot of people, but that return to the ground and the return to nature, that part of it as it starts to die back, is really lovely. You'll often find the blooms at this year in the garden are much stronger in colour as well. So the last few blooms on the roses are much more intense, much more fragrant, and very special at this time of year as well. So I don't know, I like all seasons, but particularly spring and autumn.
So mine is autumn, not that anyone's asking. Right, I love this question. Last meal on Earth, it can be 3 courses and can include drinks. Go on.
This is a very you question. This is not a very me question. A huge fan, as you know. I'm a big cook. For those of you that know me well, I am a really, really big cook. I absolutely adore food. So it's probably going to have to be something like a goat's cheese and fig tart to start, probably wrapped in filet pastry, or maybe a baked cheese, something like a baked camembert with something like bacon and maple syrup, maybe a few pecans to start. It's going to have to be a roast ribber beef. Coming from a farming family, beef is a big part of our diet, so it would have to be probably a 4 or 5 ribber beef. I know that sounds very opulent, but covered it in a garlic and panko breadcrumb crumb, roasted obviously on a trivet. Always got to be up on a trivet, never skip on the trivet when you're roasting the beef. Obviously with all the trimmings, it needs the cauliflower cheese, it needs roast potatoes, needs carrots, broccoli, sprouts with bacon and horse chestnuts is a must. Pudding wise, I don't know. Let's keep it basic. I love ice cream. You know I love ice cream. Give me a pint of ice cream, specifically Ben and Jerry's. I'm more than happy.
Well,
so
you've got to choose a flavour though. You can't just say Ben and Jerry's.
You choose the flavour of ice cream I eat. You just bring it home from the shop and I eat what's put in front of me.
Caramel suture.
There we go.
Or with the course Sunday, yeah. I really thought you were going to say Caesar salad.
Oh no, I do. No, I do love a Caesar salad. But that's 5 courses.
It's your last day on Earth. You can have a salad inside a healthy extra. You have a notable passion, again, obsession for roses. What is it about roses that captivates you the most, and how do you choose which varieties to grow in your garden?
This is really easy. There's nothing really that anybody grows that will epitomise romance and love and passion more than a rose. Now, most people will be drawn to red roses for that, but for me, the opulence of a rose is so special. Each bloom is so enchantingly beautiful. The structure, the form, the colour, the volume of flowers, and I say that at that time of year, June, July, August, September into October, nothing really epitomises love and passion like roses for me. I think that's what it is with roses that really captures my attention. However, roses alone aren't enough. The backing planting or the companion planting for me is really very key. I don't think anybody in this day and age really has the lavish ability to have nothing but a rose garden and plant only roses. For me, the garden has to work harder. It has to look good at all times. So the planting of the bulbs, the spring and the autumn flowering bulbs, the tapestry of herbaceous perennials that work behind it are really important. How do I decide which varieties to plant? Well, those of you that know me well will know I'm very much a David Austin fan. I have virtually every single rose that David Austin have bred. I have reviewed most of them. However, not all of them remain within my collection. Not all roses are bred equal. Some don't make it, and I'm never afraid to remove a rose from the garden. It doesn't matter who it's bred by or where it came from. If it doesn't really either fill my heart with joy, it has to make my heart sing. When you see something, it really, really has to capture your attention. If it doesn't make you happy and you don't want to sort of share it with other people, whether that's physically or whether that's through a social media platform, if it doesn't really make your heart sing, it needs to be removed and be replaced by something else. So I'm never afraid to remove a rose. Several have gone over the last few years. I deem them to be normally gateway plants, plants that don't have the disease resistance or the ability to stand up to our changing climate. And quite often, if a rose goes down with black spot mold, mildew, and I deem it to be a gateway plant, one of those plants that goes down with these things first, I'm never afraid to remove it from my collection and replace it with something more robust, something that's going to stand up to the weather conditions and actually not infest the garden with problems which you then have to try and deal with in another way. And obviously, being fully organic, the best way of avoiding pest and disease problems, in my opinion, is to avoid them in the first place. So good, strong varieties, proper pruning, proper mulching, proper focused watering. So if you end up with a plant in your collection that unfortunately is a gateway plant and it always goes down with these things first, it's best to just simply remove it and move on to something else.
Right, a tricky one, I think. If you could travel back to anywhere in the world that you have visited before, where would you revisit and why?
This is really easy.
Okay, if it's with me or not.
This is the only issue. No, I'd love to go back to the Nile. I was lucky enough when I was
not with me.
No, unfortunately pre-Mark, 16 years ago.
Yeah, our trip to Egypt is very different.
I'd love to go back to Egypt. I'd love to show you the Valley of the Kings. I'd like to show you the pyramids. I'd like to cruise down the Nile with you and see all the wonderful temples. I know a lot of them aren't actually open and taking visitors anymore because of wear and tear and unfortunately erosion and that kind of thing. But I was lucky enough at a very, very young age to sail down the Nile on a very, very lovely boat and visit the Valley of the Kings and lots of the sites of Egypt. I'd love to show you that. I also was lucky enough to take a hot air balloon ride at dawn over the Valley of the Kings. So that was an utterly magical experience. So I'd like to go back and share that with you at some point.
You can do the hot air balloon on your own. I'll do the rest with you. See, I'm going to share mine because mine is with you because I'm a good husband. But mine would be, and don't come for me for the pronunciation, but that Lake Winnipesaukee.
Oh,
Winnipesaukee
yes.
in New Hampshire. I think when we stumbled across that, it was like a painting, and I think about that all the time. So I think I would take us back there with you.
Sorry, okay. I'll go back there.
Next question, gardening one. Every gardener faces challenges. What have been some of your biggest hurdles in your gardening journey, particularly with roses, and how did you overcome them?
I think the biggest hurdle, realistically, is the changing of weather conditions. Over the last 10 years, gardening has become very, very challenging, and not becoming downhearted and not being afraid to try different things and adjust what you may have done in other years, I think is probably the largest learning curve there. I think over the last 10 years, we've probably lost one season in every 4. One season has completely disappeared, whether we have lost winter because it's been so mild and felt more like autumn or spring, whether it's been like 2024 where the summer just simply hasn't arrived and it's been unseasonably cold and the evenings have been bitterly cold so you can't actually sit out and enjoy your outdoor space, or whether it is the fact that autumn has completely disappeared and you don't get any season change whatsoever. The leaves are on the trees 1 minute and then the next minute the wind blows and they all blow away and it's Christmas and it's freezing cold. So I think the changing weather conditions is probably the largest hurdle that we all face. We've been here lucky in the UK that things aren't on fire, and I know people have been flooded and that kind of thing, but changing the way that you work in the garden I think is probably the largest difficulty we all face. Having a greenhouse, I think, makes that easier to elongate the growing season and also start things earlier. Other things like cold frames have made things a little easier as well. The other problem I have in the garden is realistically choosing what I want. I often find that buying plants is like ordering Chinese food. It's your eyes are always far bigger than your belly. You always want to order far more food that you're physically capable of eating, and I think the same is with anybody with a passion for anything. I always want to put more plants into the garden than I can physically fit. I want to grow more dahlias than I physically have room for. I sow more seeds than I can physically grow. There are more varieties of rose that I want to grow that I physically can't have in the garden. So choosing is always really, really hard. And unfortunately, when you have a little bit of space, we are blessed enough to have a little bit of space. But every single garden, I think, needs elasticated fences, I think. So you can let the boundaries in and out, maybe sort of borrow bits of space from your neighbours as they don't want it and you can use it and utilise it. But yeah, I think finding space for absolutely everything is a problem. Obviously, my passion has then grown as we have now the space for houseplants in the home as well. we've now got over 100 houseplants, so then the plants are absolutely everywhere. So yeah, it's and having a husband that says yes to things is difficult, because things keep arriving and there's not necessarily space for them.
I am an enabler. I'll take that. Just a disclaimer, Ethel the Labradoodle has walked back into the dining room and huffed onto her bed, so any weird breathing noises you hear is now Ethel behind me grunting and sighing. Right, next question. This is going to be a really hard one for you, and I put this one in. Describe your music taste and what are you listening to currently? That's a very hard one.
Well, I've had to ban Mark from my Apple playlist because Mark keeps dumping
our
entire albums onto a playlist. We have several playlists, one of which is called our Timeless playlist. It contains about 65,000 songs that you would listen to over and over and over again for years and years and years on end, and that's a huge playlist. That's the kind of thing we put on when we entertain people or when we're at home, pottering around for a day, maybe doing housework. I also have my own playlist, which Mark is, I say, banned from adding things to. There's loads and loads of stuff on there at the moment, lots and lots of different things. Everything from the Eurythmics all the way through to Vincent, a lot of Z Machine at the moment. He's really captivating my attention. I really like my cheesy pop. I'm not going to be afraid of saying that.
Yeah,
I like my drinks sweet. I like my drinks fruity. I like my music poppy and easy to listen to. However, if you ask me to listen to one song for the rest of my life, I think you probably know that I would listen to Africa by Toto, probably as my desert island song. And I'd be quite happy listening to that for the rest of time. I think that's an absolute musical masterpiece. So probably Toto from Africa.
Okay, you answered that quicker than I thought. For those looking to start their own gardening journey, especially with roses, what essential tips or advice would you offer beginners to help them succeed?
This is easy. So many people in my position with my qualification like to gatekeep information. They like to police information. They like to make it seem a lot more complicated than it is. And I'm not going to deny there's a massive amount of science, there's a massive amount of education, there's a huge amount of training behind what I do. I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been doing this at a high level for a very long time, and I probably know more plant names than most people. However, knowing plant names does not make you a good gardener. Having a go and being prepared to give things a go is the makings of a good gardener. Learning from your mistakes, not being afraid to change things up, and if something doesn't work, give it a go, give something else a go. If something does work, make a note of it. And if the weather conditions or the things are favourable in your favour, give it the same go. But learning and developing and never being afraid to give it a go and never being afraid to get your hands dirty and work and do what works for you at the end of the day. I'm a firm believer. I say to my online following quite a lot that you are in charge of your own garden. You garden how you want to garden. At the end of the day, it's your space. It needs to bring you joy. It needs to bring you passion and makes you smile. And if it doesn't do that, your space is wrong. So don't garden for somebody else. Garden for yourself.
Unless you're a gardener working for other people.
Well, and then I have to do as I'm told. Hence why this garden
is such frustrating and you needed to do this.
But no, garden for yourself, not for anybody else. Don't be afraid to give it a go. You are in charge, and most people are fazed by lots of things. The things that phases most people is pruning. And I think it's really, really important to remember that you are in control of the plant, not the plant in control of you. Give it a go. There's only two outcomes. You can be successful and you cannot be successful. My late grandfather used to say the plant has two options. It either lives or it dies. There is no middle ground.
We used to say the same about chickens.
So, yes, give it a go and don't be afraid of giving it a go. And garden in your own way. Garden for yourself. I say if your outdoor space does not bring you joy, does not make you smile, you're doing it wrong.
Very good advice. So you're removing the barriers.
Yeah.
Love that. Last question. Looking ahead, what are some of your gardening goals for the future? Any new projects? Or any plants you're excited to explore? I didn't want to add that.
Well, there are always plants I'm looking to explore. Obviously, being a David Austin Rose brand ambassador. I am very, very grateful and incredibly privileged to get the new varieties that are launched every year, well ahead of everybody else. I normally get them about a week ahead of everybody else. Luckily for me, that falls in the third week of May. David Austin normally launch new varieties at the Chelsea Flower Show, which coordinates beautifully with my birthday. So normally every single year I get to unveil online exclusively a brand new variety of David Austin Rose, followed up sometimes, if we're very, very lucky, by a second one in the latter part or the mid part of July. So I'm always excited to see which roses are coming up next. New projects. There is one last project in this garden before I physically run out of space, and then it will become frightfully bored and need to move very, very quickly. The area that used to be occupied by our chickens is currently a pumpkin patch, and I plan to turn that into a nice little area of the garden. Remove quite a large section of redundant and very, very boring laurel hedge. I've got some big pieces of topiary, which we've been nursing in large pots for about 5 or 6 years, that really desperately need to go into the ground. And a couple of laburnums, which I grew quite symbolically the year that we moved into this house, if you remember. Those laburnums are now about 7 or 8 feet tall and desperately need to go into the ground. So I'm going to be creating a laburnum arch with those and getting those 2 really large pieces of topiary into the ground. I think that's the next bit. Aspirational wise, I'd like to continue to grow my online following and sharing my craft. I'm very grateful for everybody that joins and subscribes. Continuing to build my subscription-based content. I have exclusive content on TikTok and on Instagram where people join me for exclusive content, paying just 99 pence per month for that. I'd like to continue growing that.
And dare I cheap.
And it is very cheap, but I want to make it accessible.
For the amount of information you put out there.
Thank you. I want to make it accessible and achievable and approachable for as many people as possible. So that's important to me. And I know, dare I say, I'd like a gardening show. I'd like a gardening and lifestyle show. I think that's where I want to be. That's where I really want to be. I'm slowly but surely giving up full-time physical work. It's difficult to describe because obviously content becomes work as well. Obviously, we've discussed, Mark and I have discussed a bookazine, like a tabletop book. I'd like a calendar. It's just finding the time to do these things. And now I'm down to just working physically as a landscaper 3 days a week. Freeing up 2 days a week for full-time content creation is hopefully where the time comes to do all the other bits and pieces that are in my little notebook that's in front of me. There's hundreds and hundreds of ideas. I'm not one of these people, unfortunately, that finds it difficult to come up with an idea for creating content. There is always something that I want to talk about. It's physically finding time and, more importantly, being able to post it, because there's only so much you can physically post in one 24-hour period. If anything, I think I post far too much content, but it just comes out of me very naturally. I enjoy sharing it. If I see something, I click it, or I film with it, I post it, and I move on to the next bit.
So that's it. That's all the questions now. The only thing I would say is we need people to reach out to you with what they would like on the podcast.
Yes, because otherwise it's going to be very one-dimensional.
Yeah, so themes, questions, episode titles, what does that look like? So, call to action.
Thank you to everybody that's bothered to listen to my chat with Mark today. And of course, thank you to Mark for his questions. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and we will be back with episode 2, which is going to be all about preparing the garden for the winter months and the onslaught of autumn. And episode 2 will be with you very shortly. Thank you very much for joining us. I'll see you all again very soon. Take care now. Bye-bye.